Cuba, the largest of the Caribbean islands, is not just a land kissed by the sun and crystalline waters. It is a place that carries the weight of a troubled history, made of revolutions, broken dreams, and resilience. Those who visit this island could easily get lost in its natural beauty, among the pristine beaches and cities that seem frozen in time. But there is much more, a hidden world that few manage to see and fully understand. Havana, the capital of Cuba, is the beating heart of this fascinating and contradictory country. A vibrant city that captures the soul with its bright colors, its colonial architecture, and the music that resonates through the streets. But beyond this postcard image, Cuba is a country that struggles every day against economic, social, and political challenges that deeply mark its fabric. Its history is marked by geopolitical tensions, by an economy suffocated by decades of embargo, and by a population that, despite everything, keeps its hope and creativity alive. One of the most emblematic aspects of this daily struggle is the difficulty of accessing the internet. In the modern world, the internet is the center of our lives. For many of us, it is difficult to even imagine an existence without the ability to connect, without the ability to communicate instantly with anyone anywhere. Yet in Cuba, access to the internet is still considered a luxury. Until a few years ago, connecting to the network was an endeavor reserved only for a lucky few who could afford the high rates of international hotels. It wasn't until 2018 that the government began making public Wi-Fi hotspots available, but access remains limited and expensive. The cost of an hour of connection can easily exceed the average Cuban's earnings in a day's work. The average salary in Cuba varies between $7 and $30 a month, making the cost of internet access an unsustainable burden for the majority of the population. This means that most Cubans cannot afford to access the internet regularly, and when they do, they often have to do so in a limited way, with one eye on their wallet and the other on the amount of data consumed. But the challenges aren't just about cost. Cuban government policies severely limit access to many international applications and services. WhatsApp, Skype, and many other online communication tools are blocked or severely restricted, making it difficult for Cubans to connect with friends and family abroad. Think for a moment about how the internet is a fundamental part of our daily lives, not only for entertainment, but also for work, to access information, to maintain relationships with the people we love. How would you feel if you were forced to live without all this, without the ability to send a simple message on WhatsApp or make a video call? Write to me in the comments what you would feel if you were deprived of this connection with the world. Yet, despite these limitations, Cubans find ways to adapt. With unparalleled creativity, many of them download data onto USB sticks and share them with friends and acquaintances, creating a kind of informal information and entertainment network. This system, known as El Paquete, has become a common solution for distributing digital content, from movies to TV series to games and apps. It's incredible how, even in the face of the greatest difficulties, human ingenuity always finds a way out. But access to the internet is not the only aspect of daily life that reflects Cuba's difficulties, but also hides a dark side that often escapes occasional visitors. In addition to economic difficulties and limitations on freedom of expression, there is a hidden reality that concerns prostitution. Prostitution in Cuba is a complex and deep-rooted phenomenon, fueled by a combination of socio-economic factors. The persistent economic crisis, income inequality, and lack of job opportunities push many women, especially young women, to seek an alternative in prostitution, seen as a way to survive and support their families. Tourism, while a vital source of income for the island, also contributes to the demand for prostitution. Many tourists, attracted by the exotic image and perceived availability, seek paid sexual encounters, fueling a clandestine market that exploits the vulnerability of Cuban women. Prostitution in Cuba is not legalized, but it is tolerated by the authorities, who often turn a blind eye to this reality. This creates an environment in which women who prostitute themselves are exposed to risks and abuse, without any legal or social protection. Although prostitution exists in many forms, from casual relationships with tourists to clandestine brothels, the phenomenon is often invisible and difficult to quantify. Women who prostitute themselves operate in the shadows, fearing social stigmatization and legal consequences. Prostitution in Cuba is a social scourge that affects the most vulnerable women, trapping them in a cycle of exploitation and degradation. It is essential to address this reality with targeted interventions to provide economic and social alternatives, fight poverty, and promote women's emancipation. Only in this way can Cuba free itself from this shadow and offer a dignified future to all its citizens. Another emblematic element is the use of ration cards. First introduced in March 1962, in response to the economic sanctions imposed by the United States, these cards are still used today by the Cuban population to purchase basic necessities. Each Cuban family has a libreta, a small booklet that allows them to obtain a limited amount of food such as rice, bread, milk, and sugar each month. This measure, born as a response to the economic crisis that hit the country after the revolution, has become an integral part of Cuban life. The amount of goods each family can purchase is limited and regulated by the state, and Cubans must rely on these cards to meet their food needs. Despite promises of economic reform, this rationing system persists today, reflecting a difficult and often precarious economic reality. Every month, millions of Cubans go to state stores to pick up their rations, knowing that they will not be able to buy more than their allotted amount. It is a reality that for many of us might seem unthinkable, accustomed as we are to the freedom to choose what to buy and how much. How would you feel if, every month, you were limited in the amount of food you could buy for your family? Think about it for a moment. How difficult would it be to live in a society where every meal is regulated by a card? Write me in the comments what you think of this system and how you would live it. Despite these difficulties, there is one aspect of Cuba that continues to enchant and fascinate. It's vintage cars. Anyone who visits the island is struck by these splendid cars from the 50s that speed through the streets of Havana. These cars, most of which date back to before the U.S. embargo of 1960, are a symbol of resistance and ingenuity. In a country where it is difficult to import new cars or spare parts, Cubans have learned to keep these machines alive with unparalleled ingenuity. Every car has a story to tell. Many of these cars have been passed down from generation to generation, and maintaining them has become an art form. Owners of these cars often spend hours repairing them, using whatever spare parts they can find, adapting modern engines to vintage chassis, and doing wonders with what they have available. Vintage cars are not just a means of transportation. They are an integral part of Cuban culture, a symbol of pride and tradition. For many Cubans, these cars also represent a source of income, with tourism being one of the country's main sources of income until the pandemic. Many owners of classic cars used them as taxis for tourists, offering visitors the chance to step back in time and travel the streets of Cuba in a car that looks like it came out of a 1950s movie. Some manage to earn up to $2,000 a month, a considerable sum in a country where the average salary is much lower. Have you ever imagined taking a ride in one of these cars? How would you feel about getting into a car that carries 70 years of history with it? Leave me a comment. I'm curious to know what you think. And speaking of Cuban symbols, we cannot forget the legendary cigars. Cuban cigars are famous throughout the world for their quality and their unmistakable flavor. They are considered a true luxury, a pleasure reserved for a few. But behind every cigar, there is a story of tradition, mastery, and dedication. The production of a Cuban cigar requires about 500 manual operations, a long and meticulous process that reflects centuries of experience and culture. Every year, Havana hosts the Cigar Festival, an event that attracts enthusiasts from all over the world, eager to discover and taste the best cigars on the island. It is a unique opportunity to immerse yourself in the culture of Cuban tobacco, visit the plantations, and observe the production process up close. In addition to its quality, the Cuban cigar is also a symbol of freedom, power, and luxury, appreciated not only by connoisseurs, but also by those who want to immerse themselves in a unique experience. Have you ever tried a Cuban cigar? Or maybe you dream of doing so. Tell me about your experience or expectations in the comments. I would love to know what you think. But Cuba's beauty and charm cannot hide the difficulties the country faces every day. The Cuban economy has been in a deep crisis for years, exacerbated by economic sanctions imposed by the United States and the global pandemic that has hit the tourism sector hard. Cuba imports about 70% of its food and fuel to meet domestic demand, and with revenues falling and a sugar industry in decline, the country is facing one of the most serious economic crises in its recent history. Power outages have become a daily occurrence for many Cubans, who often find themselves facing hours, if not days, without electricity. Access to medical care has also become increasingly difficult, with many hospitals struggling to provide basic medical supplies. Think for a moment about living in a country where sudden blackouts occur every day, where access to food is limited, and where even receiving medical care becomes a luxury. Cuba is a land of beauty and contradictions, a nation that has been able to resist and survive decades of hardship. Its people, with their extraordinary ability to adapt, continue to fight every day to improve their lives, keeping alive hope and pride in their history and culture. If you too are fascinated by this extraordinary land and want to continue discovering its hidden world, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss our next videos. And if you have lived or visited Cuba, tell us about your experience in the comments. We are here to listen and share your stories. Thank you for following us on this journey through Cuba, and see you soon in the next video.